Cleveland might be the only city in the league where the local media would rather see a backup's backup under center than admit a young star might actually be the answer. You've got hosts on air acting like they'd take the dude at Walgreens running the register before they'd give Shedeur Sanders a clean shot with Todd Monken. And if you listen long enough, you start to notice a pattern. Every name gets thrown into the conversation. Malik Willis, random vets, imaginary trades, everyone except the one guy the front office keeps quietly building around. That's not an accident. Because while half the city's microphones are screaming anybody but Shedeur, there's one voice in Cleveland who's been breaking ranks and calling it exactly how it is, G. Bush. And he's not just taking shots at fans or trolls online. He's calling out his own coworkers. Same station, same market, same shows, different level of honesty. He's looking at the moves, listening to Andrew Barry, watching how Todd Monken was hired, and saying out loud what a lot of these insiders don't want to admit. The Browns are telling you their plan, and it doesn't match the panic you're hearing every morning. Because think about it. If this was really a throwaway year, a soft rebuild, a house money season like some of these people keep pushing, why is the GM talking about a fence like it's step 2 of a long-term blueprint? Why bring in a coach known for working with young quarterbacks if you're just going to half commit to a random bridge guy? Some folks in this media market are playing a different game. Stir up fear, downplay Shedeur, push Malik Willis and whoever else as distractions, then act shocked when the front office doesn't follow along. But G. Bush, he's pulling receipts. And once you hear what he's pointing out, the whole anybody but Shedeur movement starts looking a lot less like analysis and a lot more like an agenda. Something is off in Cleveland, and it's not the roster. It's the microphones. Turn on sports radio in that city right now, and you'd think the Browns are choosing between every quarterback on earth except the one their own building keeps pointing to. Malik Willis, random backups, imaginary trades, future draft picks. You hear every name under the sun until it's time to say Shedeur Sanders. Then suddenly, everybody gets real quiet. You've got hosts and writers who are so deep on the anybody but Shedeur train they'd probably take the guy ringing up your groceries at Walgreens before they'd accept Sanders as a real option. Ken Carman sounding unsure about Malik but still floating him. Anthony Lima throwing shade. Mary Kay, Jason Lloyd, and a whole little media clique that acts like the worst thing that could happen in Cleveland is Shedeur actually getting a fair shot with Todd Monken. And that would be unbearable if it wasn't for one problem in their plan. G. Bush exists. While most of the local media is pretending they can't read the writing on the wall, G. Bush is in the barber shop calling out his own people by name. Same market, same airwaves, but he's not scared to say what the organization has basically been screaming for months. The Browns already told you what they're doing. You just chose not to listen. Andrew Barry sat down and talked about how, back in 2020, the entire focus was building weapons and infrastructure around a young quarterback. Then he turns around and says this year is the mirror image of that. Elite defense in place. Now it's time to load up the offense. On top of that, they bring in Todd Monken, a coach known for what he does with young QBs. That's not house money. That's not a soft rebuild. That's a blueprint. But instead of connecting those dots, a big chunk of the Cleveland media would rather stir fake panic, float Malik Willis as a cheap option, whisper about mystery veterans, and act like Shedeur is some fringe idea cooked up by fans. Meanwhile, the GM, the coach, and star players keep dropping the same clues. G. Bush caught it, he called it out. And once you hear how he breaks it down, you might start asking the same question he is. Is this really about football analysis in Cleveland? Or is it about protecting egos and avoiding the possibility that Shedeur Sanders is actually the guy? Once you start really listening to the way Cleveland media talks about the quarterback spot, a pattern jumps out fast. Notice the names. Malik Willis, Kirk Cousins, random bridge guys, future rookies who aren't even in the building yet. They'll run through a list of half the league before they say the one name the front office and players keep orbiting around: Shedeur Sanders. And when his name finally does come up, it's never straightforward. You'll hear someone like Ken Carman shrug and go, "I don't mind Shedeur at all, but..." Then right after that "but," the whole tone flips to doubt, uncertainty, and backup plans. Anthony Lima, same thing. He talks like Shedeur is fine in theory, as long as Cleveland never actually has to commit to him. Mary Kay, Jason Lloyd, a few others in that circle, they slide into this quiet little alliance. Float every possible alternative, question everything around Sanders, and never fully admit they just don't want him to be the answer. That's why people started calling it the "anybody but Shedeur" crowd. Because it's not just skepticism. Skepticism would be, here, what I don't like on film; here, why I think another player fits better. This is different. This is constantly introducing other names, not because they make sense, but because it keeps the conversation away from the most obvious one. They'll even resort to wild hypotheticals. They'll mention quarterbacks who haven't done anything in the league like they're some hidden gem. They'll act like a cheap flyer automatically beats betting on a young QB your own building actually seems excited about. At that point, it stops sounding like analysis and starts sounding like avoidance. And the funniest part, they act like fans don't notice. Like nobody's keeping track of how often Malik Willis gets brought up compared to how often Shedeur gets a clean, unbiased breakdown. Like nobody can see the way some segments are more comfortable hopping for a fantasy trade than acknowledging, hey, the GM and star players keep saying the same guy's name. That's where the disconnect lives. On one side, you've got a front office and locker room sending one message. On the other side, a chunk of the local media working overtime to pretend they can't hear it. And that's exactly the gap G. Bush started shining a light on, by not just disagreeing with them, but explaining why their whole approach doesn't even line up with how you actually build a team. G. Bush wouldn't matter this much if he was just another loud voice with a mic. The reason he hits a nerve is because he's been right about quarterbacks before a lot of these same people ever adjusted their takes. This is the same guy who was looking at Caleb Klubnik, Garrett Nussmeier, the early Arch Manning hype and saying, "Those dudes ain't it," while everybody else was still busy crowning them. Week after week, college game after college game, he's been breaking down QBs without falling for the stars by their name or the logo on their helmet. He's built a track record of calling it straight, long before draft season spin kicks in. So when that same voice turns around and says, "What are we even doing here with Malik Willis?" it hits different. He's not saying Malik is trash. He's asking a real question. If you don't genuinely believe Malik Willis can take you to the playoffs, why are you even talking about paying him just to be a seat warmer? Especially in a cap league where every dollar and every asset matters. And that's where he breaks it down in a way most of these shows never do. To him, there are only 3 ways to get better: draft picks, money, and players you can trade for today. Picks are capital. Money is capital. Neither is free. So when the "anybody but Shedeur" crew says, "Well, Malik only costs money, not picks," they're showing you they don't actually think in terms of team building. They're so desperate to avoid seeing Sanders get a real shot that they're willing to burn cap space on a quarterback they don't even believe in, just to keep the door cracked for more chaos later. Same thing with the "this is a rebuild year" lie. G. Bush flat out calls that out. He says some of these media voices are trying to lull fans to sleep, make you think this season doesn't really count, so that when things get messy they can turn around and blame Andrew Berry and say, "See, he trusted the wrong guy at quarterback. Time to clean house." But then Berry speaks. And what he says about how the Browns are actually thinking at QB makes that whole narrative collapse in real time. That's why G. Bush keeps telling people to stop listening to the noise and start listening to the receipts. Here, where the whole "this is just a rebuild year" narrative falls apart. Andrew Barry already told you what time it is. Most people just weren't listening. In that sit-down interview with Nathan Zegura that the Browns themselves pushed out, Barry laid out the blueprint. He went back to 2020 and explained how the entire goal back then was simple: put weapons and structure around a young quarterback, Baker Mayfield, so he could hit the ground running. Offense first. Then patch together the defense and fix that side later. Then he basically said this year is the mirror image. Now the defense is loaded. Miles, Denzel, a real pass rush, a legit unit. So the priority flips: build the offense, add pieces, create an environment where a quarterback can succeed early. And he made it clear that every coach who came in to interview understood that before they ever sat down. If you know ball, you knew this job was about one thing: maximizing the offense. That's not how a GM talks if he thinks this season is a throwaway. On top of that, Barry has been linked multiple times to one specific reason: Todd Monken is in the building. What he does with young quarterbacks, his history developing college QBs, his ability to design an offense around a growing passer. You don't bring that guy in if all you care about is squeezing 2 more uneven years out of an expensive veteran. And that's where G. Bush's point hits hard. You can have whatever opinion you want about Shedeur. You can be high on him, low on him, or somewhere in between. But Barry's vision is obvious: elite defense on one side, then load the other side with weapons and coaching tailored to a young QB. That's the exact formula he said he used once already. So when the anybody but Shedeur crew keeps saying, well, the Browns haven't really told us what they're doing, that's just not true. Barry has hinted. Monken's hire confirmed it. The official team content even shows who Monken is constantly talking to. The front office is speaking clearly. It's the people with microphones who are pretending they can't understand the language. And if you're still not convinced, just look at who inside the locker room is already talking like they know exactly who this plan is really for. In the NFL, GMs can posture, coaches can hedge, and media can spin. But there's one group that almost never lies about who they believe in: the locker room. Players don't casually attach their careers to a quarterback they think is a temporary placeholder, especially not the stars. They're the ones who feel every wasted drive, every lost season, every "we're almost there" year that never delivers. So when they start talking like a certain guy is the one, you should probably listen. And in Cleveland, listen to who keeps bringing up Shedeur. You've had veterans like Shelby Harris talk about how the team is behind him, describing him more like a leader than a project. You've had Denzel Ward mention that Shedeur has a real opportunity to go win that job if he wants it, not in a sarcastic way, but like someone who's seen enough in practice to know it's legit. Then there's Myles Garrett, face of the franchise gold jacket trajectory, saying in so many words that they look at Shedeur like he's the guy and he'll get the first shot. That's not throwaway praise, that's alignment. These aren't fringe players trying to hype up a buddy. These are pro bowlers, locker room pillars, guys with nothing to gain by forcing a narrative. If they thought this was a fake competition, they'd be way more careful with how they phrased things. Instead, they talk about Sanders the way teams usually talk about a young QB they expect to grow with, not just survive with. Now layer that over what Andrew Barry and Todd Monken are saying and doing. The GM keeps referencing building around a young quarterback. The offensive-minded head coach gets highlighted in team content, constantly talking with Shedeur. The defense is loaded, the offensive focus is obvious, and the players on that side of the ball are basically saying, yeah, we see what this is. Meanwhile, a chunk of the local media still acts like all of that doesn't exist. They'll quote anonymous concerns, bring up interception numbers, or float half-hearted doubts. But those complaints never seem to come from inside the building. You don't hear that hesitation in Myles' voice. You don't hear it from Ward. You don't hear it from the guys who actually share a huddle with him. So at some point, you have to decide whose evaluation you trust more. The people catching passes and rushing the passer on Sundays, or the people in studio who keep pretending the locker room hasn't already made up its mind. At this point, you almost have to ask, if the front office is hinting at the plan, if the head coach fits that plan, if the stars in the locker room are speaking like they see that plan, why are certain people in the Cleveland media still fighting it this hard? Because this isn't just about football takes anymore. It's about ego, old bets, and who's willing to admit they read the situation wrong. A lot of the loudest anybody but Shedeur voices were all in on other paths. Some backed Deshaun Watson as the long-term answer and planted their flag there. Others pushed the idea that the Browns should chase a veteran savior or wait on some future draft class. Now the organization seems to be moving in a different direction, and instead of adjusting, some of these personalities double down. It looks less like analysis and more like self-protection. Every time Andrew Berry or Myles Garrett says something that points towards Sanders, it puts pressure on anybody who's been dismissing that possibility for months. Admitting the team really might be building around Shedeur means admitting they might have missed the signs. And in this business, being wrong loudly is bad for brand image, unless you can spin your way out of it. So what's the move? Distract. Talk Malik Willis. Talk Kirk Cousins. Talk any name that isn't already in the room. Frame this as a wide-open search even when the building is quietly narrowing its focus. Keep the waters as muddy as possible so if Shedeur does end up being the guy, you can say, well, I never said he couldn't play, I just wanted competition. On top of that, there's the prime factor. Some people just don't like the Shedeur spotlight. The cameras, the social media, the attention. For certain old-school minds, anything attached to that brand automatically feels too loud for Cleveland. So instead of judging the situation based on what the team and players are actually saying, they judge it based on how they feel about the circus they think might come with it. The problem is, the NFL doesn't care about hurt media feelings. It cares about winning windows, and the Browns look like a franchise quietly trying to open one. So now the question is just, who's right about Shedeur? It's who's honestly reading the Browns' plan, and who's just trying to protect their own narrative before this thing fully reveals itself. Here's the part a lot of people in Cleveland media don't want to think about. What happens if Andrew Berry's vision actually works? Because on paper, the blueprint is clear. You've already got a top-tier defense. You've already got leaders like Myles and Denzel locked in. You bring in Todd Monken to modernize the offense and maximize a young quarterback. You spend this stretch loading up that side of the ball with weapons and structure. If that clicks with Shedeur at the center of it, everything changes fast. Suddenly, this isn't just another wait-and-see year. It becomes the start of a legitimate window, dominant defense, young QB on a manageable deal, creative play caller, and a front office that finally has both sides of the ball aligned. That's the formula a lot of contenders are quietly copying. Let the veteran-heavy squads age out while you hit your stride with youth and flexibility. And if that's how it plays out, watch how quickly the same people dragging Shedeur's name now turn around and rebrand themselves. The anybody but Shedeur crowd will be the first to say, man, we always said the talent was there, we just needed to see it. The same voices floating Malik Willis, mystery vets, and future rookies will suddenly pivot to, this is exactly why you trust Berry and Monken. They'll cut up one old clip where they said something mildly positive and use it like a shield. That's how this game works. But fans remember. They remember who read the signs and who tried to confuse the picture. They remember who took the GM, the head coach, and the locker room at their word, and who spent months pretending the team hadn't already shown its hand. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because right now, you're not just choosing a side in a quarterback debate. You're choosing who you believe understands where this franchise is trying to go. Are they fumbling around in a rebuild year? Or are they quietly doing what smart teams do, taking one big, calculated swing on a young quarterback they think they can build around for the next 5 to 7 years? If that swing lands, the story of this season won't be about Malik Willis rumors or talk radio hypotheticals. It'll be about the year the Browns finally stopped chasing quick fixes and started committing to a real plan. And that sets up one last question. Have the Browns misjudged their guy? Or has the media completely misread the message coming out of their own city? When you stack everything side by side, it stops looking like a random debate and starts looking like a split reality. On one side, you've got certain shows and writers in Cleveland acting like the quarterback spot is this big blank space. They toss around Malik Willis, dream up veteran stopgaps, talk about future draft classes, and treat Shedeur Sanders like he's just one name in a long list of maybes. They call this a bridge year, throw around the word rebuild, and talk like the Browns are just killing time. On the other side, you have the people who actually make decisions and win games. A GM who openly compares this moment to the last time he built around a young quarterback. A head coach hired specifically for what he does with developing passers. A defense so strong that even Barry admits the heavy lifting on that side is already done. Star players who keep talking about Shedeur like he's more opportunity than experiment. Those aren't mixed messages, that's alignment. So ask yourself, if Andrew Barry, Todd Monken, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and other veterans are all quietly pointing in the same direction, what are you really gaining by listening to voices that are still pretending everything is wide open? At some point, refusing to acknowledge the pattern stops being healthy skepticism and starts sounding like denial. That's why Bush hits so hard in this conversation. He's not begging anybody to like Shedeur. He's saying, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're saying. Stop acting like this is hidden. He's pulling together all the pieces the louder personalities keep scattering. So now it's your move. Do you think the Browns are telegraphing a long-term commitment to a young quarterback and building the roster around that idea? Or do you still buy the idea that this is all just noise, a throwaway season, and that Shedeur is some long-shot side story? Drop your take in the comments. Whose read do you trust more, the people in the building or the people on the air? If you're locked in on how this plays out, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell. Because the gap between what Cleveland's media is selling and what the Browns are actually doing is only getting more obvious from here.